Hi, people. There's been a lot going on news-wise recently. A lot of things I want to cover. Now, I'm just going to be upfront. I'm not going to get around to every comment. So if you leave a comment, you're very welcome to, but I can't guarantee that I will respond. So please don't take it personally. I am pretty busy these days with the general election coming up. That's very much on my mind, and I'm planning to make a big international trip soon. I'll get more into that maybe in a video closer to the time because I won't be uploading videos when I'm out there. So there's a lot going on, but I do think these subjects are important. So Julian Assange has been released from prison, and you know, it's being hailed as it's a great thing. He was a courageous whistleblower. He was a courageous investigative journalist. Um, I'll be quite honest, I've never been quite sold on the whole Assange thing, and I do have a degree of cynicism about Mr. Assange's intentions. Um, and rather than talk about this, I'm just going to read out the Times editorial because it pretty much weighs up what I've been thinking on the Assange case. I think they've got it right. But bear in mind, if this guy was really a crusader for journalistic freedom, you would think the national newspapers would be applauding him. They'd have no reason not to. And it's not a question of nationalistic bias or anything like that. I've seen very few papers actually supporting Assange. Anyway, this is the piece, and I agree with it. I think it sums it up well. I don't always agree with Times editorials, but I think this is correct. Exit Assange. One more thing before I get into this. I do think the Assange case has been a thorn in the side of Western democracies, particularly this country, because it's allowed some hostile actors and some totalitarian states, Russia, China, Iran, etc., to think that they have some sort of platform to point fingers at the West and say, oh, Western hypocrisy, what about Julian Assange? And you get nationalists from various parts of the world. I've seen Indians do it as well, Indian nationalists, uh, as if to say well, this is evidence of the West's hypocrisy. Now, I do actually believe the West is guilty of hypocrisy in some areas, um, but Assange is not one of them. And there is no rational way this guy should be treated as the same as someone like Evan Gershkovich, the American journalist currently languishing in a Russian prison, quite clearly being held hostage because of his citizenship and no other reason. The Russians have produced no evidence on his guilt. Um, Okay, so this is the piece. Exit Assange. The founder of WikiLeaks is no genuine whistleblower, let alone a test case for journalistic freedom, but a thief. His release shows compassion, not vindication. Julian Assange left Britain on Monday after 5 years in custody while fighting extradition to the United States. Being at liberty is not equivalent to innocence or exoneration, however. The founder of WikiLeaks walked free after reaching a deal with US prosecutors under which he will apparently plead guilty to conspiring to obtain and disclose classified national defense documents. Lois Sanchez's supporters hail him as a generational hero, in the phrase of the US presidential candidate Robert Kennedy Jr., and the victim of a grotesque miscarriage of justice, according to Jeremy Corbyn. The truth is thus elevated. Assange and his organisation have purloined and put into the public domain hundreds of thousands of classified documents without redactions. He has thereby served the interests of repressive regimes and recklessly endangered the lives of dissidents. It is unknown how many now lie dead. It is absurd that the Committee to Protect Journalists, a non-governmental organisation, should depict the case as an assault on press freedom. Assange is not a whistleblower or even a journalist, but a common thief. His release is an act of clemency by governments that might reasonably have pursued him, not a vindication of his activities. Assange was indicted by the US Justice Department not for what he believes, but what he has done. He was charged on multiple counts of espionage after WikiLeaks published online hundreds of thousands of stolen classified documents. This material mainly, but not exclusively, related to the American-led wars in Afghanistan and Iraq after the 9/11 terrorist attacks. Assange's supporters typically cite, among these disclosures, footage of a US airstrike that killed Iraqi journalists. But this genuinely newsworthy finding is exceptional. In other words, that's not characteristic of the sort of thing that Assange is focused on. WikiLeaks also published names of more than 100 Afghans who were providing information on the Taliban to Western intelligence agencies. These brave people had every right to expect their identities would never be revealed. Assange has put their lives at risk. Goodness knows how many might have died as a result of his actions. Many now lie dead. Indeed, many now lie dead. Even this is not the sum of WikiLeaks' disrepute. The organisation dumped online a vast trove of data shortly after the assassination of Osama bin Laden by US Navy SEALs in 2011. This might have alerted bin Laden the US intelligence was closing in on him and precipitated his flight. WikiLeaks further stole documents from servers belonging to the Democratic Party, aiding the efforts of the Kremlin to interfere in the 2016 US US presidential election. Assange has paid a price for this record, but he is the author of his misfortunes. Accused by two Swedish women of serious sexual assault, he chose to abscond from bail and escape an international arrest warrant by seeking refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy in London in 2012. Just a point about that, my own thoughts here. Assange is someone who is all about transparency and, accountability. But when the scrutiny turned on him, he wouldn't face scrutiny. His argument was that that would be an excuse for the Americans to extradite him. But, what he was accused of was a serious crime. I'm not saying he was guilty, but surely Mr. Assange believes in due process. And if he doesn't, I mean, I think that, and put it this way, I think an innocent person would want to clear their name, not run away. Um, when Ecuador had enough of this apparently insanitary presence, it allowed the Metropolitan Police to enter the embassy and arrest Assange in 2019. That's Ecuador, the very government that gave him refuge. So even those who gave him refuge found him frankly ungrateful. I mean, that surely says something. Ever since Assange has been treated with unyielding compassion by the courts, a judge refused to allow his extradition to the US in 2021 as his mental health meant he was a suicide risk. It is welcome that the saga of Assange is now ending, yet important to be demystified. His ordeal is self-inflicted. He might face decades in prison. He is instead heading to freedom in his native Australia. He has never faced charges for his alleged assault of the two Swedish women, who have been subject to a barrage of misogynistic insinuations and abuse from his supporters. Why am I not surprised? Assange hence stands as a beneficiary of the scrupulous procedures of constitutional societies subject to the rule of law. The autocratic regimes and causes whose interests he has advanced treat genuine journalists altogether different. A long period of contrite self-examination on his part and from his celebrity supporters would be apt at this juncture. It is lamentably unlikely to come. Yeah, I mean that's basically how I feel about it. I think Assange is a bit of a narcissist. I think he's full of himself. Um, and I do think he's advanced totalitarian states because he hasn't went out of his way to expose the Kremlin or Xi Jinping's regime or the North Korean regime or the Iranians. It's been almost entirely focused in the West. And yes, there has been shoot-offs from WikiLeaks, I suppose you could argue, from dissidents in those countries who've tried to push the same thing. But I have a big problem treating Assange as some sort of hero when his action did endanger lives. Particularly poignant is that thing about the Afghan interpreters who worked with Western forces. What right did Assange have to publish their names? In what public interest did that serve? It's one thing drawing attention to war crimes by US forces, which, let's be honest, the American forces in Iraq were far from squeaky clean. There were some pretty appalling things done. And I've always been of the opinion that soldiers or others in a position of power who cross a line have to be held to account. That isn't the issue. Like this editorial says, that was the outlier. It wasn't. That wasn't what most of WikiLeaks was about. Unfortunately, a lot of people out there have a certain image in their mind of Assange being this courageous whistleblower. But surely it's telling that the very embassy that gave him refuge, i.e., Ecuador, had had enough of him. Apparently, he was really messy in the place. He really disrespected his hosts. Um, Now, Ecuador is no big friend of the UK, and they had enough of him. So, what does that tell you? Um, and for me, also the thing that he wouldn't go to Sweden to clear his name. His argument was, "Oh, I'll be extradited," but that was conjecture. The point is, those women had a right to be heard. Now, I'm not saying he was guilty, and I'm not saying they were telling the truth. But I remember a lot of conspiracy theories around that time. Oh, they're trying to sully his name. This is all a made up crime just to try and slander Assange. And I do think there's a bit of a personality cult around him, which I've always been skeptical of, regardless of the subject. Um, so on one hand, it's good that we're rid of him, but I agree. I think there is a false narrative when it comes to Julian Assange. I do think that he has been good for totalitarian regimes because it's kind of added to their propaganda against the West. Um, and if he was really, really interested in transparency and so on, he would have also recognized the danger of publishing names of interpreters. None of his supporters ever talk about that. So go figure. Anyway, I agree with that editorial. I know a lot of my subscribers are going to disagree, but this isn't because the exposes have been aimed at the West. It's because they've been only aimed at the West. And it's because of the reckless way in which he's done it, and his arrogance, his failure to sort of be open to scrutiny himself. I mean, Assange seems to think he can play God. He can, open all this information, hundreds of thousands of documents, and oh, that's fine. It's all in the interest of the public. But is it really? Um, Certainly, I don't see any public interest in publishing the names of interpreters and others who helped Western forces in Afghanistan. They have to live under the Taliban. Um, so I think there is a false narrative with Assange, and I think there's a personality cult around him. But what's done is done. He can enjoy his freedom. Um, let's just see what he does with it. If he, exploits us and turns himself into a victim, because I do think he's got a narcissistic side. The interviews I've seen of him, he's very self-righteous. Very. I've never got a good impression from Julian Assange. But I appreciate subscribers will disagree. I'm going to leave the comment section open. You're welcome to do so. But that's how I feel about it.